Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our event tonight. We apologize for all of the technical issues which we had, and we're starting a little bit late. But I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Brandon Wallace, and I am the MC for tonight's event. So I work at the Information and Culture Center of the Embassy of Japan. And I first became acquainted with Japan through the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, the JET program, which is one of the largest exchange programs in the world. It's my time in Japan that introduced me to bonsai and many other cultural activities. And so I'm very happy to be here tonight. And I'm very happy to be working at the Information and Culture Center. I encourage you all to familiarize yourself with the Information and Culture Center's activities that we host throughout the year, including bonsai. Including ikebana, flower arranging, and different events such as manga or anime or featuring J-pop. And we have all of the social media. We have a Facebook page, cultural newsletter to keep up with all of the interesting events happening, and Instagram, Twitter. So there's no excuse to miss out on any of our exciting events. So since we're a little bit late, I'm just going to cut things short. And first, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Kawamura Yasuhisa to say a few introductory remarks. Ambassador?
Thank you for your introduction. Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual demonstration for the 2021 Bonsai Show. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cette démonstration virtuelle de bonsai. I would like to thank Mr. Vianney Leduc, President of the Ottawa Bonsai Society, for conducting the demonstration, the exhibits, workshops, and events organized by the Ottawa Bonsai Society over the years have greatly contributed to the promotion and growing popularity of bonsai in Ottawa. Through this interactive demonstration, I hope every visitor will be able to experience bonsai in a new way and learn about its history and cultivation techniques. I also hope that you'll be inspired to learn more about Japan and Japanese culture through this exhibit and workshop. I believe that our two countries' shared love of nature will bring us closer together as we discover the art of bonsai and enjoy the great and beautiful nature of our countries provide. Merci de votre participation à cette démonstration. N'hésitez pas à poser des questions. Thank you for being with us today. Please enjoy the demonstration and don't be afraid to ask questions. Thank you for your participation. Enjoy it.
Thank you, Ambassador. And that is an excellent point. To keep today's event very interactive, please feel free to ask a question at any time, either through the Facebook comments or here in the Zoom chats. And if you do want to ask a question through the Zoom webinar, please use the Q&A function. So thank you, Ambassador. And Vianney, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Vianney Leduc. I've been an active member of the Ottawa Bonsai Society for the past 20 years, and I'm very happy to be with you tonight and be able to share this interactive demonstration. My colleague, Steve Ulrich, is with us. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Vianney.
And both of us will work together in order to answer all the questions that you'll be sending us. As mentioned, you can send your question via comment on the Facebook Live or via the Q&A portion on Zoom. We will be presenting you a series of video clips to show the transformation process of the juniper that you're currently seeing on the screen. This is a garden Japanese juniper, and that is the material we'll be using tonight. And before we move on into the transformation process itself, I would like everybody to be on the same page on what is actually a bonsai. because before I started in bonsai, I thought it was simply a tree living in a pot. So let's look at this video clip, which will define it a bit better for us.
The word itself means a tree in a pot. I'm sure you all realize this is a bonsai and this is not. This is actually a Japanese garden juniper. It is the exact material that we use in the Ottawa Bonsai Society workshop. If we look at it, a bonsai has a nice shape. This has no shape whatsoever. So part of the definition of bonsai is to create something that is aesthetically pleasing. And of course, we have to use horticultural techniques that are appropriate for that species. So the art of bonsai is a combination of art to make it look nice and horticultural technique to transform a tree so that it looks old and live in a nice pot of appropriate size.
Before we move on to the next section, which talks about the tool, I would like to provide some information on what are the sources of material for us to practice bonsai. At the simplest form, for somebody who has a lot of patience, we can actually start from a seed. It is a long process, which can often require 15 to 25 years, but it is a way. Another way would be to start from a cutting. You see a nice tree from somebody in your club, you can ask to take a cutting if it is appropriate for that species. That's another way. We can also go shopping in local nurseries where we have access to a lot of material. And this is the tree we have now. It's such a material. Another way is to go collecting trees in nature. A lot of time we can find trees in nature that have a lot of character. And the fastest way to get yourself a bonsai is actually to buy one which is finished already, but you don't get the pleasure of creating it. So now let's look at this video clip because we want to see, are we going to use general purpose tool to work on this demonstration tree tonight, or are we going to use specialized tool?
In order to transform the juniper we have from nursery, we will need to use some tool. Some of the tools are actually very unique to bonsai. For example, aluminum wire. We use it to bend branches and position them where we need them to be, because branches of a tree will grow where the tree wants them to grow. In our case, we want to have control over where they are. Now, the aluminum wire, we choose a size that is roughly between 1/3 and 1/2 the size of the branch that we want to bend. We apply it roughly at an angle of 45 to 50 degrees. In order to cut the wires, we use specialized tool called the wire cutter. When we need to cut branches, we use what we call a concave cutter. Those two tools are very unique and are the main tool that we use for bonsai. We also use pruning shear that are not unique to bonsai, that are applicable to various plants. Now, the wire cutter has a round shape. This round shape means I can go tight against the branch to cut the wire without touching the branch itself. Now, I would like to show you the use of the concave cutter. The concave shape means that we can cut the branch very close to the trunk so that it doesn't leave a stub. So when we're talking about using wires to position branch, this is what we aim for. We can change the angle of a branch, change its position in order to bring it where it is we want it to be.
Are there any questions so far on what we have covered?
Yes, Jenny, we have a question. So someone is asking, where can you find these specialized tools?
Generally speaking, we find them on a specialized store, specialized bonsai store. There are various vendors in a large city. And if you look under Google for bonsai tool, you'll be able to find these vendors. Because they're specialized, they're not available in regular plant store, regular nursery.
Thank you, Jenny. We have another question here. So someone else is asking if we can make bonsai from any kind of tree.
There are very many species that we can work into bonsai. There are limits, but there's a huge number of species. But some of them, like let's say one of our oak, Canadian oak, the leaf is so big that in order to make it into a bonsai, you will need to basically create a very large tree. But we can make bonsai with our native larches. We can make bonsai from our native pine. We can make bonsai from a whole series of junipers that exist in local nurseries. We can use boxwood. We can use cotoneaster. We can even use apple trees. So there are a lot of species which we can use to create bonsai.
Thank you very much. There's another question here. Someone is asking, if you go to a local nursery, can you find these trees for bonsai, or you have to choose a tree which can be used for bonsai?
You would have to know which species is appropriate to use as bonsai. So if you're starting, you should consult your local club, but I'll give you an idea. If I go to a local nursery, I will be checking the various junipers. I will be checking if they have larches. I will be checking if they have mugo pine. I will check if they have Amur maple. So also boxwood is a great tree to use. So there are many species available at local nursery, but you still need to know which one is the most applicable for using as bonsai material.
Thank you very much. These are all the questions we had for this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Steve. We want to create a bonsai from the rough material, from the juniper, the garden juniper that we've seen on the initial image. How does one proceed to create a bonsai with such a raw material? Do we have a method? Do we have things that we should consider? And this next video clip will introduce us to what are the considerations for actually creating a bonsai, because when you create, you have to design. So let's check to see what are some of those considerations for the creation.
Let's look at some of the thought process that we have to consider, because we mentioned bonsai is an art form, therefore aesthetic is important. The first concept of a bonsai is to decide on the front, because a tree has a trunk, and that trunk might look better from a specific angle. Let's rotate that tree. Right now what you're seeing is a lot of movement in the trunk. If I was to show you the tree in this angle, you would see a trunk line that is a lot less interesting. This is to show us that when we do make decision in the creation process, one of the first part we'll have to decide what is going to be the front of the tree. Once we have that front of the tree, we'll have to analyze what is the characteristic of the trunk. Is it a very slim trunk that goes high, or is it a very thick trunk for the same height? And we'll have to consider what are going to be my first branch. Where will the position of the first branch be? Where will the position of the second branch be? So we'll have to make decision. Which branch do we prune? Which branch do we keep? In this second example, what we're seeing is a tree of roughly the same height, but with a very thick trunk. That will have a big influence on where my first branch is going to be. A very thick trunk will have its first branch much lower in relation to the height of the tree, while a very slim tree, the very first branch will be very up high in the tree. This characteristic of trunk will be important because we'll be able to prune a lot more foliage down in the trunk line. At the same time, a tree that is with a thick trunk will be able to have a wider silhouette. We also have to make sure that every foliage pad is clearly identified, which means there is empty space between each of the foliage pads. These empty spaces are actually there to frame a foliage pad and make them stand out. So these are some of the things we'll be looking for.
Now, if we want to resume and look at these two trees, I would like to point out that I'm using the word sometime branch and sometime foliage pad. If you look at my cursor, I use those two, but they're similar. Generally speaking, one branch will lead to one foliage pad. So a branch and a foliage pad are similar. What is very important in deciding on the creation of a bonsai? We talked about determining the characteristic of the trunk. We need to show, if we have the concept of a front, we will need to choose a front which will show the movement as best as possible. We also have to analyze the trunk to see, is it slim or is it thick? But after we've done that, we need, and I use in referring to the main branches throughout the video, what I mean by main branches is the first branch, the first foliage pad on one side of the trunk, and the second most important foliage pad on the other side of the trunk. Sometimes we call them branch 1 and branch 2. Sometimes we call them the main branch. After we choose our front, one of the challenges will be to determine our main branch. I also want to point out that the overall silhouette of the tree that we'll be transforming tonight will be a triangular silhouette. So all these components we need to put together in order to do the creation. Now, is there any question on the thought process at this point?
Okay, so we have a question not related to the thought process necessarily, Jenny, but there's a question about the kind of soil that we use for bonsai cultivation.
Very interesting question. If it's okay with you, I would keep that question for the last section, because in the last section of the presentation, we will show you exactly what bonsai soil is about. So it's an excellent question, but I would like to keep it for when we actually see the video clip of the soil.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, Yannick.
Okay. Now it is time to start the transformation process. But as you've seen, the juniper has a whole lot of foliage on it. So much foliage that actually it's hard to fully analyze the characteristic of the trunk and its quality. So our very first task is we need to clean up the trunk in order to see what we're dealing with.
One of the things we mentioned in the thought process is we need to analyze the trunk. Does it have movement in it? Is it a thick trunk? Is it a slim trunk? And actually, if we look closer, there are little shoots that are appearing in different places on the trunk. These shoots are actually in the way of us seeing the trunk properly, the trunk line. So the first task is going to be to use the pruning shear to remove all of these shoots so that we can see the trunk better.
Okay, so after this cleaning up process, we hope to see enough of the trunk to analyze its characteristic. Let's check it out.
At this point, we've cleaned up enough of the unnecessary foliage to have a feeling of what the tree is offering us. First thing that I notice is the tree is rather slim. It's going to be just above a feet tall if we use the full height, and it's maybe the thickness of a finger. With a slim tree, the first branch should start much higher up in the tree, which means we'll be able to remove some of the branches at the bottom. So I'll use the concave cutter to start removing. Even though it's a nice branch, it's simply too low in the tree to fit in the design from an aesthetic point of view.
We mentioned in the thought process that one of our big consideration for the design is looking at possible front. So let's examine this tree and see what are the possibilities for a front.
We're starting to see a trunk that is basically showing a nice curve. Now, I want to make a choice of front that is going to show me the curve as best as possible. So I'm at the point of basically turning the tree around and looking which way does the curve look better. And there's two sides where the trunk line is showing nice movement. Either this side or the opposite side, where you can see the trunk line as well. So those are my two options at this point. Now there's still a bit of visual noise with these long shoots at the top. I'm going to reduce them simply because they're in the way of us seeing properly what the tree is offering us, and they're simply way too wide at the top to be used.
I've shown you two possible front, but I didn't make a decision yet. In order to choose a front, when you have more than one possibility, you need to check for every possible front. Do I have access to two branches that are well positioned that could act as my two main branch? Remember branch number one, branch number two, which we call main branch. So for each possible front, the idea is to verify, do I have access to two main branch that would be well positioned?
Now I need to concentrate on, I know I have a nice curve to show. There's some that the trunk line is interesting. Where could I choose to have a first and second branch to create my two first foliage pad? So I will work with this as my front to design the tree. Now, I have an interesting branch here, which could be first branch. I've got an interesting branch here that could be my second branch.
If you notice, I chose a front, but I forgot to explain why I chose that front. I had access to two nice main branches on both potential fronts. So how did I go about choosing one rather than the other? after we check for our two main branches, our next step is to verify from each potential front, do I have a branch at the back that could act as a main branch at the back, as an important branch at the back? And the reason why I chose the front that I chose is simply because there was a nice branch at the back that I could position and that would act as a perfect first branch at the back of the tree. The other potential front did not have a back branch that was good enough to use. So let's look at this back branch.
After I've identified my two first branch, I need to consider what would be branches that are suitable as back branch, because we need the tree to have depth, and the depth is established with branches that are located at the back. And actually, I do have a branch that is well positioned at the back.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite show you the back branch. We'll see it a bit later. But now that we have identified our branch number 1, branch number 2, and the first branch at the back, we're in a position to possibly clean up some more of the trunk line. In other words, remove some unrequired branch. Let's see that process.
But now it's time to make some decision. There are still too many branches on this trunk. We see very clearly that it's a very slim trunk. The fact that it's slim means we need to have a lot of negative space in between the foliage pad. And right now, there's too many branches for us to create all this negative space. So we're at the stage where we still need to remove branches that are not required on the design. You might wonder why remove so many branches. It is simply because the trunk is very slim. On a slim trunk, we mentioned we need to have our branches start higher up in the tree, but we also have to make sure that there's plenty of negative space so that the weight of the foliage pad is not exceeding the visual weight of the trunk. So in looking at this, there is this large branch here that will have to go. Now we're seeing very clearly from the front, these two foliage pads will be my first one. This will be a back branch. Even this one is competing with this one here. That will have to go.
Are there any questions on this part where we're removing branches and where we have made some decision?
Yes. You talked about slim trunk versus thick trunks previously, and someone is wondering if fall trees fit in either categories, or is there other nuances in terms of trunk thickness?
Yes, definitely. I showed the two extreme of trunk size. I showed the very slim and the very thick, but there's a whole series of trees that are right in between, which means that the amount of negative space will vary. If you have an average trunk, in other words, it's neither thick nor slim. If it's an average trunk, then you will have a bit more negative space than the thick trunk, but less so than the slim trunk. The number of branches on an average size trunk, there will be a bit more branches than on the slim tree, but less than on a big tree. So yes, many trees will fit into the middle, which we call an average trunk size.
Thank you very much, Vianney. And can you comment about the importance of deciding the front of your tree from the get-go to start up the design? Or is it something that you can, change up later on during the process?
It's an interesting question. Normally, it is one of the very first steps we have to do. Sometime we will look at the tree for a long period. Let's say a tree offers a different front, but the position of the branch are not ideal. We might use technique to bring the branch where we need to be. But choosing a front is one of the most critical portion of deciding on a design. Because once you choose a front, all other elements will complement that front. Once you choose a front, you will have to make sure that your two main branches complement that front. You will have to make sure that your first back branch complements that trunk. So it is probably one of the most critical decisions, and it has to be done right away when you analyze the tree.
Thank you, Vianney. There's another question from the horticultural point of view about how many branches can you safely remove at once? Because you removed quite a few branches previously, so someone is wondering about that.
That's a very good question. There is a maximum for sure, but we have to remember that a bonsai is a little piece of art living in a pot under special condition. To create a bonsai and removing so much foliage, for sure, we will weaken the tree somewhat. The reason being, the tree with less foliage will do less photosynthesis. Less photosynthesis means less energy for the tree. But the tree will get used to this new arrangement of foliage. We will just need to take precaution after we do such a transformation which removes so much foliage. We will have to take precaution. For example, a tree like this that has been transformed will not be able to be left out in the winter. It will no longer have the capacity to resist our harsh winter. But if we do that type of exercise in the spring, the tree will develop a lot more foliage and will regain its energy. So during the transformation process, yes, we are weakening the tree, but we adjust our horticultural method for that tree afterwards.
Thank you very much. So circling back to the discussion about slim versus thick trunks, someone is asking if the trunk will keep growing or expanding once it is in a bonsai pot.
Very good question. We as bonsai enthusiasts have to decide how high we want the tree to be. And a tree will keep growing. So it's a living art form if we want. But as the tree is growing, we'll have to decide, do we want to allow it to grow taller? And the decision will be based on, do I gain any aesthetic value in allowing the tree to grow taller? If not, I will keep the tree at the same height by using pruning techniques. If there is value in allowing the tree to grow taller, i.e. aesthetical value, then I will allow. But generally speaking, for most of the trees, once they reach a certain height, they're at their optimum from an aesthetic point of view. We would like to keep that height the same for a very long time.
Thank you very much, Vianney. These are all the questions we had related to the parts we saw in the video.
Merci, Steve. We've talked about choosing, actually, we just talked about this subject. How high do we want the tree to be? We mentioned earlier, we want to select the front of the tree. We want to select the two main branches. We want to select an important back branch. But the question that was asked is interesting because we have to select how tall do we want our tree to be? And if there's multiple branches at the top, which one could potentially become the continuation of the trunk line? So let's check this next video.
The next step is how tall do we want the tree to be, and where do we want the top of the tree to be. We don't have to use the whole tree. We could actually use a side branch as the continuation of the trunk. So we have to look which one of either this one or this branch would make a nice top of the tree. Because the front is in this area, I find that the one going forward is the best one. So now if you look at it, now we know this is going to be the top of the tree.
So we've seen that in this case, we had a few branches at the top, which could have that as the continuation of the trunk. We had to make a choice. The reason I chose the one in the front is because we want the top of the tree to lean towards the viewer. That's the reason. And in the next step, we'll talk about wiring. But in order to apply the wiring, we know that there's a lot of foliage on a branch. We need to prepare our branch by creating a path for the application of the wire. That's what this next section is about.
Now, my next step is going to be to apply wiring. Wiring so that I can place the branch where I need them to grow. But in order to do the wiring, I need to clean up inside of the foliage that I have and remove everything that is growing below the branch, because it's going to be in the way of the wire. And what is growing below the foliage pad, below the branch, is not getting much sun. So it's not contributing to the health of the tree. I'll also be cleaning up what is the top of the tree. It has a lot of foliage. We're going to raise this top, but as we raise it, there's going to be some section we want to use as branches. So if we look at it from this angle, I can see that the top of the tree's got a few sections. This will become a branch. So I need to clean up in this area so that I can apply the wire and maneuver the top. So the same exercise we did in cleaning up the trunk, we're doing here in order to see what can we do with this section.
We mentioned the importance of the two main branches before, our branch 1 and 2. They actually have an even bigger role. They're going to be the first branch that we have to work on and position in order for them to set the tone for all the other branches after. So let's start the process.
So I'll start by wiring the two first branch so that you see the process. We apply the wire roughly at 45 degree to 50 degree. I apply the wire by inserting it in between the foliage. We've removed a lot of the foliage, so we want to keep a certain amount. So I'm basically inserting it in between the foliage. This wiring is actually one of the most important parts for us to control the shape of the tree.
And we now that we have wired the two main branches, how do we position them? Because the wire allow us to change their position in order to optimize the aesthetic. So let's see what are the options.
Once my wire is on, I will play with the position now of where that branch would be. And there's two aspects to the position. Where do I go with my branches? Do I go up or do I go down? We have to remember the goal of creating a bonsai is to create the illusion of an old tree living in a pot. If you go in nature, I'm sure you notice that old coniferous tree, the branches are growing downward. And younger tree, the branches are growing upward. So in order for the tree to look old, I want to have my branches growing downward. I'll just move it so that I can see the front. And you'll see that my first two branches are roughly in position. Once all of the other branches are wired, what I'll do is I'll verify if there's unity and proper space between all of them.
Let's check a bit the concept of anchoring the wire.
Now I want to show you in a more close-up the wiring of two other branches. And if you notice, we're using one wire to position two branches. So I'm going to follow the same pattern as this wire. We twist it a few times around the trunk simply because it serves as an anchor. The wire needs to be anchored in order to properly function.
And now we'll move to wiring the other branches.
It is now time to position all of the branches that were wired and position them in relation to these first two branches that we.
I would like to pause a second here and I'll just back up.
So it is now time to position all of the branches that were wired.
Okay, if you pay attention to where my cursor is, the reason I want to show you that part, this is a side branch that we decided was going to become the top of the tree. You see that side branch being very horizontal. With the wire, we'll be able to lift it up so that it will act as the continuation of the trunk. This will have two advantages. One is we're going to create additional movement in the trunk line, and we're going to create taper in the sense that the trunk will go from larger to smaller. So using a branch at the top to become the apex of the tree is a very good move, actually. Sorry for that interruption.
Iron and position them in relation to these first two branches that we position. The reason why it's important, they need to complement each other in different ways. We need to fill some void and we need to respect the angle that we have on our first branches. What we've decided to do is create the look of an older tree. So the first two branches that are the most important are going downwards. I cannot have branches going upward if the other two, the main one, are going downward. And I've wired the top of the tree so that we can position it. So what I'll do now in order to position these branches is I need to look at it from the front and start positioning.
Let's check what the result is after the positioning.
Now that the tree has been wired and positioned, we can notice that a lot of foliage has been removed. Actually, more than 2/3 of the foliage has been removed. It is part of the process of transformation. It could be intimidating at the beginning. If you notice, the overall shape of the tree is a triangular silhouette. This is intentional. Our first two branches are the widest, and as you go up the tree, branches are getting shorter. What you'll notice also, every branch is growing downward to create this illusion of age. And we have foliage pad that are framed with empty space. This empty space is required to really frame the foliage pad. The slimmer the trunk, the more empty space there should be between foliage pad. The thicker the trunk, the less empty space.
Let's compare the before the transformation and after the transformation. This is our garden juniper when we started the process of analyzing it. You see that the tree looks young, vibrant, and healthy, which is not exactly what we want to create in a bonsai. In a bonsai, we want to create the illusion that the tree is old and it's living in a nice, appropriate pot. In order to make that tree look old, we cannot have tons of foliage. So if we look at the trunk line, we've cleaned up the trunk line to show it properly. This gives us a sense that we're seeing a tree a bit far away, and many of the branches when the tree, as the tree got older, died. The illusion of age is we're using different techniques to create the illusion of age. The main technique we have used in this presentation is the positioning of the branch growing downward. If you notice, all of them were positioned to grow downward. So in bonsai, we can actually use trees, material like this one, that are less than 10-year-old, and use technique to create the illusion of age. So often people will ask us in the show, how old is it? And very often our answer would be, how old does it look? Because if you were to look at this tree, it would probably look older than 10-year-old. So this is an important part of the art form, transforming a tree to create the illusion of age. Are there any questions on that part, the last part we covered?
Yes, there are two questions about the wiring. The first one is about the type of wire that we use in bonsai practice. Is it specialized type of wire or just
any? Okay, very good question. We use specialized type of wire. We have two options. We can use aluminum wire or copper wire. Generally speaking, we recommend people using aluminum wire when they start, and it's annealed aluminum wire. They come in various size. They come in the size as small as 1 millimeter up to 6 millimeter. The smaller the wire, the smaller the branch it can bend. The bigger the wire, the bigger the branch it can bend. So it is specialized wire. If somebody was to use steel wire from a general hardware store, they would actually damage the branch quite a bit, simply because the wire is so stiff that it would damage the bark. So yes, we use specialized wire.
And also, how long do we keep the wire on the tree?
Very interesting. And the answer varies depending on the species. You know, we mentioned that we need to be aware of the characteristic of various species. On the juniper we're seeing now, it is considered softwood. On softwood, the wire might stay there for 12 to 18 months. On hardwood, let's say we were to bend branches on a maple, the branch of a maple, the wood of the maple is rather hard and would keep its new position within about 2 months, 2 months and a half. So it varies depending on the species.
Thank you very much. Another question about the wires is that, will it hurt the tree or impact the growth?
No, actually it does not, unless you were to forget the wire for a few years. Then it would eat into the bark and potentially could damage the tree. And maybe a side answer to this, the fact that we bend the branch is very similar to what nature does. So the watering we apply and the bending we do is not damaging to the branch. It is similar, if you want, to the weight of snow on coniferous in the winter. We do it in a way that respect the capacity of the branch to be bent.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That's all we had for this question of the presentation.
Merci, Steve. Now, are we at the stage, you think, where we can show our tree in an annual show? And most of you will say no, and you would be right. So what would be the next step to create, to have this tree evolve to become better?
The next step in the transformation of this tree. The first part is styling this tree, which we did, but it's still in garden soil. So our next step, which will be done in early spring, will be to transfer the tree into bonsai soil, into a bonsai pot. And if you notice in that bonsai pot, there is holes at the bottom. Bonsai soil is quite different than garden soil. Actually, there is no soil in bonsai soil. What we have is mostly grit. We provide a soil that has a lot of oxygen and that can retain humidity. The excess water would simply go through the drainage hole in the pot. So if it was springtime, we could have done both the styling and the repot, which is actually what we do in the Ottawa Bonsai Society workshop. But because this is fall or late summer, it is not the appropriate time to do the repot. But in the next year, we'll do the repot. Also, in the future, we want to refine the foliage pad and create more density into them, so that eventually, maybe 2-3 years from now, it could be shown in one of our exhibitions.
Is there any question on that last part of the presentation? We've covered the soil, and I know there was a question on soil before. Maybe something to add to this soil discussion. Because the soil is very poor in nutrient, like it doesn't have nutrient, we have to make sure that we provide the nutrient via a fertilization program. Bonsai is a living tree, and like every tree in nature and every plant in nature, it needs to get some mineral from the soil, the roots. In the case of a bonsai, we fertilize on a regular basis. A tree like this one could be fertilized once or twice a week during the growing season, for example. So maybe that addressed the question on soil that we saw before, but please, if you want to expand some more, ask other question.
Yes, thank you, Jenny, about the clarification about the soil. There is a question regarding the relative dimensions of the containers that we use or the pots. Are there any guidelines that help us select the right pot?
Oh, very good question. Yes, there are some guidelines. And when we say guidelines, they're suggested basically size, in the sense that, we can vary. But to give you an idea, in general, we would choose the depth of the pot that is equal to the thickness of the trunk, roughly speaking. We would choose the width of the pot around 2/3 the width of the tree, or 2/3 the height of the tree if it's a very slim and tall tree. Now, to complement the answer on the pot that you have seen, that I've shown you in this last video clip, will not be the final pot. Sometime when we do move a tree from garden soil to bonsai soil, in order to make sure we have a really success rate where the tree will live and thrive, we will use a bigger pot than required, and we will keep more root than required. This will facilitate the recovery of the tree. Subsequent repot, then we will move to a smaller and more appropriate pot. So sometime it will take a few years, sometime a few repots to really get into the final pot.
Thank you very much, Yanni. It's a very good answer to the question. There's another question about the aftercare, about all those stressful operations we did to the tree, bending the branches, trimming a lot of the foliage. What can we do to facilitate the recovery?
In this case, we did not touch the root. So we can place the tree right away in full sun. What we need to do between now and winter is, because we remove so much foliage, the tree cannot prepare itself for winter like normal. So we will need to make sure that the tree is not getting temperature below -2 Celsius until for the whole winter. So in the fall, we have to watch out the temperature, because we know this tree has gone through a stressful operation. We know it cannot prepare itself for harsh winter. We need to consider that and verify the daily temperature to ensure that if it is going to be below -2, we protect the tree by bringing it in the garage or in the house or in a cold room. Now, if it was spring and we would do the repot at the same time, this would be a second stress. In order to address the second stress, we would place the tree in a shaded area, simply because we played with the roots, and the roots will not be in a position to provide the required water for all the foliage to be in the sun. So if it was spring and we did the repot, the tree would be in the shade for anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks until we would see some growth happening. Because when the tree would show us new growth, it means that the root have now recuperated and they're transporting resources to the tree. The aftercare will depend also on the species. But in the case of this juniper, I think we've covered what it is we need to do.
Thank you very much, Yanni. Unfortunately, this is all the time we had for question and answer. So thank you to all the participants to having provided some insightful questions and to having engaged with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your participation. I hope you get to learn some more about bonsai in the future. I'll pass the microphone back to the MC.
Thank you very much, Vianney, and thank you very much, Steve. It was a really great, interesting discussion. I apologize once again for the technical problems we had at the beginning, but we just extended a little bit further. There were lots of interesting questions. We could not, I think, get to all of them. So that's a testament to how interested people are in bonsai. I encourage everyone to check out the online show that's happening on the Embassy of Japan's website, and that show can be viewed on the Embassy of Japan's webpage. There are many different bonsai plants there to look at and learn from, 36 different plants. And that show will end October 3rd. And I also encourage you all to come out to future embassy events. Vianney is a very common, familiar face at the embassy. We host the Ottawa Bonsai Society's exhibition, usually in person once a year. And we have many other cultural events throughout the year. So if you have not already, I encourage you to check out the Embassy of Japan's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, newsletter. There are many different ways to engage. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you all in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.